Hi there, Sam and Dina here from the Rift Online Church, building God's kingdom in you. And tonight we're going to be continuing our series on the book of Judges in chapter 14, beginning at the first verse. And it says, "And Samson went down to Timnath, and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines." We got a problem in verse 1. And this happens to a lot of us, not just with this kind of relational sin. We get into relationships that God did not prescribe for us, that God did not intend for us, and we get involved in things that were not the will of God. And the reason is because we went after it. Samson went there. He had no business going there, but he goes there. And tonight we're kind of titling this, "Don't Be a Useful Idiot." Because we really examine the life of Samson. Samson was an idiot. Samson was a screw up. Samson did not get things right. God had to use him in spite of his stupidity. Samson did some stupid things, and this is stupid thing number 1. He's supposed to be a Nazirite from his mother's womb, and here he is going after something that's outside of the law. You're not supposed to marry a foreign woman. They weren't supposed to do that. And here he goes doing it. And so, second verse, it says, "And he came up and told his father and his mother, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife." Then his father and his mother said to him, "Is there never a woman among the daughters of your brethren, among all my people, that you go to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines?" And Samson said unto his father, "Get her for me, for she pleases me well." And this is another problem. We go after what we like. And a lot of times, it's not wrong to like something, but a lot of times what we like is an indicator of where we're at spiritually. We like things that aren't really godly. We like things that are not the will of God. We want to go after something that God did not intend, that isn't within the restrictions that God gave us. And we don't like to talk about restrictions because we like to talk about grace, and we like to act like we can do anything we want. And that's not the case. There are restrictions. Jesus said, "Narrow is the way and straight is the gate. If few there be that find it." But we want to do whatever we want. And a lot of times we get ourselves in trouble. We run into all kinds of spiritual dilemmas and outright catastrophes simply because we went after something we had no business going after. Whether it was an ambition or whether it was a relationship that God did not intend for us. You know, it's like, I don't even know who said this, but it's gone around in social media and it went viral. It said, God did not send him if he's somebody else's husband. And sometimes you gotta go there, because there are people who actually start thinking, "Oh, that's my real husband. He just married to somebody else." No, it don't work that way. God is in control. God is in authority. That person already married somebody else. As the saying goes, there's plenty of fish in the sea. And we develop these inordinate affections and these wrongful attachments to things that God did not intend for us. If that's somebody else's husband, he's not yours. That's somebody else's wife. That's not for you. Go looking for something else. But Samson, who's supposed to be a Philistine a Philistine. Samson, who's supposed to be consecrated to God from his mother's womb, is going full tilt in the other direction in this area. And a lot of times we think that's okay. And you look at it in the modern church, we have the same thing going on. We have people who, they're in all kind of sexual sin, and they think they're going to be a prophet to the nations. And some of them will get there. They'll preach all over the world and involved in all kinds of nastiness on the side, and we think it's okay, and it's not. It's not. There is such a thing as spiritual contamination. There is such a thing. People like to talk about soul ties, and I'm not necessarily into all that. But what I will say is this: who you're married to is going to change who you are. They become part of your life, and you got to watch what you hook up with, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a business partnership, whether it's a ministry that you're going to partner with. A lot of times we're just looking at what pleases us. It looks good, it sounds good, it feels good, it smells good, whatever, and we go after it, and we haven't even thought of the consequences. We haven't thought whether it's pleasing to God or not. And in this case, it certainly wasn't. And so in verse 4 it says, "But his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord, that he sought occasion against the Philistines. For at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Now some of you say, well, it was of the Lord. It's something you got to understand here. It wasn't that it was the will of God expressly for Samson to be married to a Philistine woman. God was not intending some lifelong marriage to this Philistine woman. That wasn't what it was about. Samson was anointed and consecrated to be a deliverer, and thus far he had done nothing. And very often, God has to arrange a circumstance, even use, that's why I call him a useful idiot. He had to use Samson's own predilection for foreign women to get him to actually do something. Because so far in the biblical record, we have no record of Samson doing anything for Israel. And what this seems to imply is this is not the first time he liked a Philistine woman. Because, you know, we like to look at these stories and think somebody, oh, they just saw somebody and this is what they're going to marry, and because we have these illusions and perceptions of how the ancient world was, and we think people then didn't have as much common sense as they have now. And Samson does lack some common sense, but we see evidence here that he's going after something that he knows is not lawful. But like it says, that it was of the Lord, that God was causing this now, because otherwise Samson wasn't going to do anything. And it's like so many people who, they've got a gift, they've got an anointing, they've got this vision, and they won't do anything with it. And God has to back you into a wall for you to do anything. Some of you wonder why you're going through all kinds of stuff. You got all kinds of attack on your life. And the reason is because if it wasn't that way, you wouldn't get down on your knees. You wouldn't pray. You wouldn't fast. And that's not a condemnation. It's an observation. Been there. Been there. And it says, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. All right, skip verse. Samson went down, and his father and his mother to Timnath. And he came to the vineyards of Timnath, and behold, a young lion roared against him. Famous story here, and look at me, I skipped it. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him as he would have rent a kid. And he had nothing in his hand, but he told not his father or his mother what he had done. So he killed a lion with his bare hands. And a lot of times we get into situations and God anoints us to survive the situation, even though we weren't supposed to get involved in the first place. And then a lot of us have this terrible tendency. We think that means God approves of what we did, or that God is with us in the sense that he's okay with what we're doing and how we've been operating. And that isn't always the case. And we're going to see in the story of Samson over the next couple weeks that this is definitely the case, that God wasn't with Samson's tendencies, and Samson ends up losing his anointing, as many of us famously know. It's a famous story. They cut off his hair and he loses his strength, etc., etc. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, and so it says he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after a time, he returned to take her. And he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. Behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. And he took thereof in his hands and went on eating, and came to his father and his mother, and gave to them, and they did eat. But he told them not they had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. This is another problem. Now, I've heard people preach about God providing and honey in the lion, and no, that the wrong revelation people had. That revelation was not from God. This is a dead body. A Nazirite or a Nazarene is not supposed to, someone with a Nazarene vow is not supposed to touch or go near a dead body. Not only does he go near it, not only does he touch it, but he takes honey from it and he eats it, and then gives to some other people to eat, to his own mother and father. So not only has he contaminated himself and polluted his consecration, but he did it to other people. And very often, the same thing happens in ministry. We become contaminated, whether we did something we weren't supposed to do, or because we got the wrong motives, or what have you, and it contaminates our message. And then what inevitably happens is we end up feeding that junk to everybody else. Especially when we got something we want to justify about our life, we will develop a whole theology around it, and then next thing you know, that's what we're teaching. And you see that throughout the whole world of ministry. You see all this self-serving revelation that people have. And they feed it to other people, and other people get contaminated, and they go on to teach it to somebody else. And then we got a really big problem. Good example is the teaching of, we shouldn't judge. Now we've got that to such an extent that we don't deal with sin in the church, and then we wonder why we don't see the power of God move. Then we wonder why people seem to get saved, but they don't get right. And in America, they did a study, and they found that only 1% of new converts to Christianity in America are still professing and practicing Christians 5 years later. Does that sound like a genuine conversion to you? Sure doesn't to me. It's very telling. And it's because we're not feeding people right. We're either feeding them things that are not nutritious, or we're feeding them things that are unclean. And some of them don't even know. As his father and mother did not know. Verse 10, it says, so his father went down to the woman, and Samson made a feast. For the young men used to do that. And it came to pass, when they saw him, that they brought 30 companions to be with him. So he's got a party going on. And Samson said to them, I will now put forth a riddle to you. If you can certainly declare it to me within 7 days of the feast, and find it out, I'll give you 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. But if you cannot declare it to me, then you shall give me 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. And they said to him, put forth your riddle that we may hear it. And he said to them, out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. And it came to pass on the 7th day that they said unto Samson's wife, entice your husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you called us to take that we have? Is it not so? And something about when you get comfortable doing what's wrong, you always end up arrogant. You make bets you shouldn't make. You take chances you shouldn't make. You get involved in stuff you got no business getting involved in. And Samson does the same thing. And something you got to understand about the ancient world. Riddle games, for whatever reason, were considered almost sacred. You do not cheat at a riddle game. It was a big thing not to cheat. That'll start a fight. That'll start a war. Odd as that is. But here they go and they cheat. Samson's got himself in for a bet, and it doesn't seem like much. It says 30 sheets and 30 changes of clothes. And it doesn't seem like much, but apparently what they're betting on is expensive. Because these men are afraid of losing. And now they're threatening to burn her and her father's house. And she wept before him the 7 days, while their feast lasted. And it came to pass on the 7th day that he told her, because she lay sore upon him. And she told a riddle to the children of her people. And the men of the city said unto him on the 7th day, before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you had not found out my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon. And he slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil, and gave change of garments to them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, who used to be his friend. And that's the end of that chapter. And we're going to discuss the next chapter next week. But something I've noticed here, and people don't really talk about this too much. That last verse, it says that Samson's wife was given to his companion, who used to be his friend, or he used as a friend, depending on how you want to phrase it. One of the problems that will arise when we get into this habit of going after things God did not intend for us, that were not lawful for us, and we get involved in things, and God stays with us in the midst of it, because, you know, and I know I've been in situations that God allowed me to survive because he had a purpose for me. It didn't mean he approved of what I was doing. There were some situations where, looking back at it, I'm surprised I'm alive. Things where I really should have gotten killed. But God preserved me because I had a purpose. But it sure didn't mean that God was in any way approving what I was involved in at the time. I'm pretty sure he wasn't. And the same thing here, where God has to end up using Samson as a useful idiot. Samson makes this bet, he loses, he gets mad. He's supposed to be dealing with the Philistines who are oppressing Israel, but he doesn't do it until he's motivated by his own pride. And my goodness, there's a lot of us that we don't prophesy to anybody unless somebody else is prophesying. We don't go and do anything in ministry unless somebody else is. We do things out of jealousy. We do things to compete. We do things because we want status. We have all these other motives. And because God has a purpose, and because God loves his people, he ends up using us. And I've seen it happen. There's people, the guy's got bad character, he's got bad motives, but he can prophesy an accurate word. He's got a real anointing to prophesy. And he thinks God is approving of him, and that's not the case. It's just like the incident with the water in the rock. Moses got mad at the people and said some things God didn't tell him to say. The water still flowed out of the rock. And very often, God is still going to move because God has a plan. His plan is going to go forth. And he may even use you in spite of your shortcomings and your willful ignorance. That happens. But my caution to you tonight, my challenge to you tonight, is to examine your motives, examine the things you've been involved in, examine the relationships that you're involved in, examine how you relate to people, examine your motivation, and even the way you go about doing what you do, whether it's in ministry, dealing with your family, things on your job. What's the real deal? Why are you really doing what you're doing? Why do you really want what you want? And if you do that honestly, you may very well find some things that you might have to change. You might find some things that you're going to have to get right with God, and that's okay. That's a good thing. It means there's an opportunity for you to grow. There's an opportunity to get free of some bondage that you've had. Because sometimes we're not bound by the devil, we're bound by us. Sometimes our greatest bondage is our own self-will. And can God use you in spite of all that? Yes. But I don't know about you, I don't want to be a useful idiot. I don't want to be the guy that God uses me in spite of how stupid I'm being. Remember, we're not rewarded according to how great it is what we did. We're rewarded according to how faithful we were with what we were given to do. And if God is having to back you into a wall, if he's having to kind of force your hand, if he's having to use you in spite of how dumb you've been because you're stuck on stupid, you're not being faithful. You're not being diligent. I challenge you to examine yourself tonight and see whether indeed you may have been a useful idiot. Just about everybody has been. I can't say I haven't been. I mean, goodness, I did some stupid things, and some things weren't necessarily, what we would consider sin. But, I had imitated preachers I admired. used some of their phraseology, talked like them, and that wasn't right. Emulation's a work of the flesh. Yet, prophesied accurately, prayed for people, they got healed. Drug addicts used to get free if they touched me. God used me. But in some areas, I was being an idiot. I was being a fool. And the question here, it's not about self-condemnation. It's not about works. But it's rather about coming to the realization that if indeed you love God more than anything, you're going to want to know if you've been a bit stuck on stupid yourself. Because the strength of your love for God will drive you to want to please Him. Will drive you to want to make the most of what He put in your hands. And at the end of the day, that's what this is really about. This is about loving God more than anything. That you won't touch the unclean thing. There's a saying in some cultures here in the West, sometimes you do what you got to do. And I've even heard preachers say that, and they're doing stuff that isn't right. I remember years ago, a preacher I knew, there was a job I wanted to get, but they required a certain amount of experience in that particular field. I had a little less experience in that. She actually offered to pretend she was from another company, and she's going to write a recommendation for me so that I could pretend I had the required number of years of experience. It was a preacher offering to lie. I said, I can't do that. And she said to me, sometimes you do what you got to do. And a lot of us, we're guilty in that area. Sometimes we think, well, this is what I got to do. And ultimately, when we do those things, it's because we don't trust God. Maybe Samson was hungry when he went after that honey. He didn't trust God enough to provide elsewhere. Or he just wasn't patient enough to wait till he got somewhere else to go get something to eat. And that's a problem for a lot of us too. Because we've got appetites. Not just for food, but for other things. So there was this man, a very long time ago, who worked in the banking industry. And he pulled off a really huge scam. It got a lot of people in trouble, caused all kinds of problems. And eventually he was caught, and he went to prison and all that. But something he said after he got caught and all that, he revealed the reason why he was able to con so many people. He said, I don't remember if this was his exact words, but this was the gist of it. He said, people will give you anything if you know what they're hungry for. What are you hungry for? An honest answer to that question is going to reveal a lot to you. It'll reveal where you can be deceived. It'll reveal where you can be sidetracked. It'll reveal which temptations will actually get you, and a whole lot of other things. It'll reveal basically every single way that you could possibly be hoodwinked by the enemy. If you understand your appetites, some of those appetites may have to change. And I challenge you tonight to ask yourself that question: what am I really hungry for? Answer that question honestly tonight. And I promise you, you're going to see some spiritual growth you've never experienced before. I'm Sam Medina. God bless you, and God keep you.